There have been times in my life where without a shadow of doubt, I have known that God was present. God was there. God was doing something active in my life. When I was 17 years old, I stood before the congregation of my home church, and I had some scratched out notes. I was supposed to deliver part of the message that day, and I had no idea what even a sermon would be like for me to give. I had no idea what I was doing. And I stood there in that oak pulpit that many great pastors had stood before, and I stood there, and muttered out some words. And when I got finished, I knew something had happened. Number one, I didn't say anything that was on my sheet because I was too nervous to even look down. Number two, God spoke. And He called me to the ministry that day when I was 17 years old. I knew He was there. When I was at the Belmont Mansion, and inside the Belmont Mansion, there's a spiral staircase in this old house. Kind of rickety, really. You kind of wonder how that's going to work. And at the top of that staircase stood my wife-to-be, my bride. Beautiful, elegant. And I'm there trembling and afraid. And she didn't fall, thank goodness. She gracefully came down, and God was there. When the two children that I'm blessed to be the father of were born, I remember staying up with them all night. I couldn't take my eyes off them. I held them, and I watched them. And the nurses, when they even asked, "Where are the babies? Where are they?" "They're right here. I've got them." I wouldn't let go of them because God was there. There have been those moments in my life and in your life, right? Where without a shadow of doubt, you know God is there. This is a miracle of God that only He can provide. But there are all these other times in our lives where we wonder. God gives us a whole lot of freedom. We do things, we see things, we experience realities, and we wonder, God, are you really there? God, are you with us? The Bible kind of describes those two senses for us. There's obvious places in the Bible where God is certainly present. God is leading and acting and directing every move that occurs. And those are passages that we find our favorite passages. But then there are a whole lot of other passages where God, you wonder just a little bit, are you there? Are you paying attention to what's happening? God, where are you in this? Ruth is one of those books. I think Ruth is so powerful because it speaks to us in the ordinary parts of our lives. We all go through these experiences where we wonder, God, are you there? God, are you present? God, are you active in this situation? And if so, how are you going to show that to us? The book of Ruth is filled with this dynamic. And it leads to the question, is God with us? Is God guiding us? And let's see how God answers that today. Because He does. The first thing we realize in Ruth, it sets it up for us, and we understand that in life, we're all going to face difficult situations. In life, we're going to face difficult situations. Ruth begins with a kind of a list of these difficult situations. Number one, and this is one you may not notice right away, but it begins with the setting in the day when judges ruled. That's our first difficult situation because as we understand the biblical narrative, the day when judges ruled after the Israelites entered into the promised land and began to take the promised land, the Lord really had not given them a great leader. Moses had died, Joshua had died, and there's a refrain that goes through the book of Judges, and it says something like this: there was no king in Israel, so people just did as they saw fit, the best that they could. And so can you imagine what life might have been like when people just did as they saw fit in their own eyes? I think we can probably understand it was a chaotic time for them. It was a difficult time. There were lots of battles and wars and conflicts and different social and political and military struggles. And every once in a while, God would raise up a leader, a judge, who would try to rally the troops and get everybody back focused on what God wants. They might have some military victories, and people would cheer and be excited. And then after a little while longer, that refrain just kind of comes across the page. There was no king, so everybody just did as they saw fit. And life went crumbling down again. That's like a pattern in the book of Judges. Another excellent book, maybe we'll get to study sometime. But Ruth is set during that time period. So there's the first difficulty. Life is uncertain for these people. Second difficulty, there is a famine in the land. Famine, we don't know what causes the famine. We know that the promised land was prone to famine from different sources. It could be drought, because they had dry spells where they weren't able to grow the food necessary to sustain life. It could have been disease from animals or insects. It could have been a great battle that caused, we know that Judges, they had great battles, and it caused an overuse of resources and a depletion of resources. Whatever the cause, we understand there's a famine in the land, and famines are very difficult. We've never understood what that is like, to live during a time of famine. Our country has experienced periods of famine. You think about the Dust Bowl in the Midwest and how that drove people. What happened to the Dust Bowl? That drove people to the west coast of the United States. But famine is something we don't really get in our modern society, but they were very common in the days of the Bible and very real and impactful. That's problem number two. We don't really understand what causes it, but we know that there's this great famine. And thirdly, there's a man from Bethlehem in Judah, which ironically enough, Bethlehem means the house of bread. In this house of bread, this man from Bethlehem, the house of bread in Judah, is forced to leave and go where? To a foreign land, an enemy land on the eastern side of the Dead Sea and the Jordan River, the land of Moab. And he went there to live for a while in Moab. We all face difficult situations. All of us have experiences that sometimes are out of our control, and we wonder, God, how are you going to help us through this? How are you going to help us deal with this? You think for Elimelech, the struggle that he had to go through to make that decision to take his family and move to this foreign place, and how hard that might have been, and how shameful that might have been for him to leave his homeland and go to this foreign land and be really subject to whatever they would give them. A difficult situation. It's kind of like the situation of the father who's been furloughed for about a year now. And he wonders, how is he going to be able to continue to provide for his family? There's been a lot of situations like this in our community and country recently. Yes, there are other opportunities. Yes, there are other means, but we don't realize that there's been a large portion of our population wondering, I wonder how we'll be able to provide the next meal for our family. What goes on in that man's mind? What does he think about when all he knows how to do, he's not been allowed to do for quite a period of time? What resonates with him when he looks at his wife and his children and he wonders, what's the future going to hold for them, for us? What do I need to do? Is it time now to go back to school or to try something else? What do I need to do to make life move forward? Because I can't just keep living like this. What about the retired person who has wondered, with the volatility of the stock market, how am I going to really be able to endure? What happens if it all crashes down and I have more years to live? How am I going to survive this crisis that we see in our world today? People deal with this even in our own world. We all face difficult situations, and we kind of wonder, God, are you there? What are you up to? Are you doing anything? Certainly, I think that question was asked by Elimelech and his family. Well, sometimes a difficult situation becomes what? More difficult. Just when you think the going is getting tough, it gets a little tougher. I don't know if that's a saying, but I think it could be. Look at what the Bible tells us. He tells us that when they go to Moab, that all of a sudden something happens. While they're in Moab, Elimelech dies. He hadn't planned on that. He hadn't planned on uprooting his family, taking them to this foreign land, and then dying. No. I can't think of a man in his right mind that would do that. But it happened. The family is now without their leader, without their father and husband. The family is left in this situation. It's a difficult situation that they found themselves in, and it's gotten a whole lot more difficult. Think about Naomi and the decisions that she has to make and how she has to now provide. Because when they went to Moab, what they probably were told to do was to glean in the fields of the Moabites. Whatever's left over is what you get. You're a foreigner, and we're going to give you refuge, but you don't have any really standing here, so you're just going to have to get what's left. And for Elimelech, he thought he could do that for a while, but now Naomi, she has to decide what she's going to do. That's a difficult situation. Well, somehow she figures out that her two boys, they need to get married. And they marry Moabite women, and maybe this will help them, and maybe this will give them something and new families in which to have some sort of relationship with or connection to. The Bible doesn't give us the details, but we know that they are married. And we might wonder if this is a good thing or not, considering God said do not marry people of Moab. But anyway, they do this to the best of their ability. And lo and behold, tragedy strikes again. Mahlon and Chilion, what happens? They die too. But not before the Bible tells us they were married 10 years, but they didn't have any children. Married 10 years and no kids? In the Bible time, something's not right. Difficult situations can become more difficult. I've seen that over and over again in my ministry. I've seen families struggle beyond really any understanding of how to deal with that struggle. It's kind of like the Sullivan family. Mrs. Sullivan's the matriarch of the family. When Mrs. Sullivan gets the family together, there's peace and harmony. And people listen to her and they understand her. And she brings a level of confidence that the family desperately needs. And then Mrs. Sullivan dies. And what happens to the family? They fall apart. One by one, it's just one disaster after another. There's divorce and remarriage and children and more children and conflict and fighting. It lasts for days and weeks and months. And the family can't even get together for Christmas or Easter or Thanksgiving or any holiday without there being a knockdown drag out. And somebody every once in a while will say, you know, Ma, we really not appreciate this, but they go at it anyway. We've all seen that happen. We've seen that happen. Maybe it's happened in our family where there's just so much conflict and it's embroiled and we wonder. And it's because we've lost the leader, the head. Elimelech never planned on dying. He never planned on not being able to guide and direct his wife and his sons. But it happened and it left a hole. And now they're having to figure things out. And the greatest tragedy of all is now Naomi is left by herself with her two Moabite daughters-in-law. So what does she have to do? When tragedy strikes, what do we have to do? We have to make a decision. Tragedy leads us to times of decision. Naomi says, I'm going back home. We're going back. Maybe we shouldn't have left to begin with. It was shameful. It was a difficult decision. But nothing but sorrow and tragedy has happened here. My husband has died. My 2 sons have not been able to have children of their own. And now they have died. And I'm going back. I'm going back home. We always face a moment of decision. Difficult situations require decisions. I remember when I had to make a difficult decision once. I remember moving my family away from our home for ministry and it becoming a disaster. And I remember deciding, I'm going back. I don't care what happens. I don't care if I lose everything I own. I'm going back. I'm done. And I made that decision. And I started questioning that decision as I'm driving a U-Haul across Interstate 40 back home. I stopped at a gas station. My wife doesn't probably even remember this. I stopped at a gas station. She had Hannah in the car. I had Hunter in the U-Haul with whatever we could get. And I remember pumping gas. And I remember looking. It was chilly. And I remember looking and thinking, God, am I making the right decision? Is there ever going to be any hope for me? I mean, what's going to happen? And you know what? A car pulled up beside me. It had bumper stickers all over it. And I always thought those were tacky. But I'm pumping gas. And I'm asking this question, and I'm looking at all these stickers, and I'm thinking, God, am I making the right decision? And I look at it, and there's the one right in the middle. Trust God. Trust God, and everything else will be taken care of. And I go, well, that was a quick answer. Click, gas is filled up. Put it back on the thing, get back in the U-Haul, head back home. And I had to make a decision, and I don't regret that decision. I trusted God. And He provided. And that's something we could miss. But it's right here in the Scripture. When Naomi heard that the Lord had come to the aid of His people by providing food for them, she said, I'm going home. You see, God provides. She had lived through that difficult season of her life. She had lived through having to move. She had lived through a famine. She had lived through losing her husband. She had lived through losing her 2 sons. And then she hears God has provided. And we need to hear that today too. God provides. You see, that's the message. That's the message of this first passage of Ruth. And it sets the stage for everything that's going to come. God does provide. Not always in ways that we can readily see or understand. Yes, there are those big moments where we know without a shadow of a doubt that God, you are with us, you are providing, but there are the other moments, the small moments. But as you think over your life, they add up. And what we need to realize, what the father who's worried about how to feed his family needs to realize is that God will provide. God will provide a way to feed your family, a way for you to have a better job, a way for you to have a better life. The retired person who's worried about their income, well, if they have children that listen to the Bible, they need to take heart because the Bible says, children, honor your father and mother, which, by the way, means if your parents are without money, you have to provide for them. So they don't need to worry. God will provide. God will provide to the family that's broken, that's struggling, that's conflicted, that's angry. God can mend all of that if they'll give it a time and chance. God provides over and over and over again. What else do we need to know? Maybe just one more thing. Wherever life takes us in our journey, and listen, I know we all do the very best that we can. We all do the best that we can with what we have, don't we? And we make mistakes, and we make good decisions, and sometimes we make even more mistakes and bad decisions. Regardless, if we believe in our God, if we place our faith and trust in Him as Naomi has done, we can believe that He will lead us safely. It may not be everything that we imagined it would be. It may not be in our time. but God will lead us safely. You see, she's going to go home, and she's going to see just how much God provides. I want to encourage you to see that as well. And anything that your life is facing, God still provides for his people. He always has. He always will.